The Lone Shepherd and the Wolves, a battle for survival. The wind howled through the snow-laden trees, rattling the skeletal branches as the moon cast eerie shadows across the Montana wilderness. The air was sharp, thick with the scent of pine and the unyielding chill of winter. It was a night where predators prowled, and only the strongest survived. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Duke, a German shepherd, had once known the warmth of a home. He had once had a name whispered to him in loving voices, hands that scratched behind his ears and reassured him after every storm. But those days were gone. Abandoned on the outskirts of the wild, he had learned to fend for himself, his sleek coat now rough, his ribs pressing against his skin from weeks of hunger. But hunger was not his biggest problem tonight. The wolves had found him. The first growl came from behind him, a deep, guttural sound that froze Duke in place. His ears flicked, his breath visible in the frigid air as he turned to face the threat. 3 wolves emerged from the darkness, their golden eyes glinting like embers in the dim light. A pack. Duke was outnumbered. The leader, a massive gray wolf with a jagged scar running down his muzzle, stepped forward. His hackles bristled, muscles coiled, eyes locked onto Duke, a clear warning. This was their territory. Duke lowered his stance, his body tense. Running meant death, fighting, almost certain death. But he would not go down without a fight. The alpha lunged first. Duke barely dodged, feeling the rush of air as the wolf's jaws snapped inches from his throat. The other 2 wolves circled him, cutting off his escape, their movements precise, coordinated. One of them struck, fangs grazing Duke's flank, sending a sharp sting of pain through his body. He yelped, but refused to fall. Another attack, this time from behind. A wolf clamped its jaws around his hind leg, dragging him down into the snow. Duke kicked wildly, his claws raking across the wolf's snout. The wolf howled in pain and released him, but Duke knew this was only the beginning. The alpha moved in for the kill. Duke struggled to rise, his body trembling from exertion, but he would not surrender. Then the forest shifted. A deep, thunderous growl echoed through the trees, so powerful it seemed to shake the ground itself. The wolves hesitated, their ears flicking in the direction of the sound. And from the darkness, a lone figure emerged. Another wolf, but unlike any Duke had ever seen. This wolf was massive, even larger than the alpha. His fur was thick and silver, his body scarred from countless battles. His eyes, an intense shade of amber, locked onto Duke. For a moment, Duke couldn't move. Friend or foe? The answer came when the silver wolf turned not toward Duke, but toward the pack. With a snarl, he launched himself at the alpha. The battle was ferocious, the sound of snapping jaws and thundering paws filling the air. The silver wolf moved like a ghost, faster, stronger, relentless. The alpha fought back, but he was no match. With a final, crushing bite to the neck, the silver wolf sent the alpha sprawling into the snow. The remaining 2 wolves hesitated, their instincts warring between loyalty and survival. The silver wolf snarled again, his command clear. Leave! And just like that, they did. The 2 wolves disappeared into the darkness, leaving their fallen leader behind. Duke lay in the snow, breathing hard, his body aching. The silver wolf turned to him, studying him for a long moment. Then, to Duke's astonishment, the wolf lowered his head not in dominance, but in acknowledgement. An invitation. Duke hesitated. The wild had been cruel to him. Could he trust this stranger? But deep in his gut, he knew. Survival was not meant to be alone. Slowly, Duke rose to his feet. And without another word, he followed. The unbreakable bond. In the weeks that followed, Duke learned. The silver wolf, whom Duke had come to know as Ghost, was more than just a warrior. He was a leader, a protector, a teacher. Ghost led Duke to his den, where other wolves watched with cautious curiosity. But Ghost made his stance clear. Duke was one of them now. At first, it was difficult. Duke was not built like a wolf, nor did he think like one. But he learned. He adapted. Ghost showed him how to track prey, how to move through the snow without sound, how to fight as a pack. And in return, Duke gave something to them. Loyalty. A heart not just of a wolf, but of something more. One night, as Duke lay beside Ghost atop a ridge, watching the moon cast its glow over the valley, he realized something. He was no longer a helpless stray. He was no longer alone. He was where he was meant to be. And as the night wind carried the howls of the pack across the mountains, Duke lifted his head and howled with them. Duke's last stand, a shepherd against the wild. Duke, a German shepherd once beloved, now abandoned, was barely breathing, his legs shaking with exhaustion. He had wandered too far, searching for food, searching for warmth, but he was not alone. They'd been stalking him for over an hour. The wolves. The first sign of danger came in the form of a low growl, a rumble of menace rolling through the air like distant thunder. Duke's ears flicked, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he was weak. Running would only make it worse. From the trees, they emerged. 5 of them. Shadows given form. The alpha, a scarred gray wolf, led the pack forward, her amber eyes burning with ruthless intent. Flanking her, 2 younger wolves, lean and hungry, moved with deadly precision. They had made their decision. Duke was prey. His ribs pressed against his skin, his once powerful frame reduced to bones wrapped in a ragged coat. But his heart still beat with the fire of survival. He would not go down without a fight. The first lunge came fast. A younger wolf snapped at his hind leg, teeth grazing just enough to draw blood. Duke yelped but whirled to face his attacker, his own teeth flashing white in the moonlight. He bit back, landing a sharp nip that made the wolf recoil. But the pack was coordinated. The second wolf struck, clamping its jaws down on Duke's shoulder. Pain lanced through him. He tried to shake it off, but the weight was too much. The moment he faltered, the alpha moved in. This was it. This was where he died. But then the forest shifted. A deafening snarl tore through the night, a sound so powerful that even the wolves hesitated. Their ears flicked toward the darkness, their confidence suddenly wavering. And then, from the trees, another figure emerged. A lone wolf. But not just any wolf. A giant. His fur was silver, his body scarred from countless battles. His amber eyes burned brighter than the alpha's, and in them, Duke saw something he did not expect. Defiance. The silver wolf wasn't here to join the attack. He was here to stop it. The alpha snarled, stepping forward, her posture rigid with dominance. But the silver wolf did not flinch. He let out another warning growl, low, deep, final. The younger wolves shifted uneasily. The alpha hesitated. And just like that, the balance changed. The wolves backed away. One by one, they melted into the night. The alpha was the last to go, her golden eyes lingering on Duke, as if memorizing his face. Then, she too was gone. The night fell silent once more. Duke staggered, his breath ragged, his body screaming in pain. The silver wolf watched him, his stance unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Duke tensed. But the wolf did not attack. Instead, he did something unbelievable. He lowered his head, not in dominance, but in acceptance. An invitation. Duke hesitated. The wild had been cruel to him. But deep in his gut, he knew. Survival was not meant to be alone. Slowly, Duke rose to his feet. And without another word, he followed. A brotherhood forged in the wild. In the weeks that followed, Duke learned. The silver wolf, whom Duke came to know as Ghost, was more than just a protector. He was a leader. He had chosen Duke, not as an enemy, not as prey, but as something more. A brother. The pack had accepted Ghost's decision, though not without caution. Duke had to prove himself, had to earn his place among them. But he adapted. He learned their ways. Ghost taught him how to hunt, how to read the forest, how to survive not as a stray but as a wolf. And in return, Duke brought something to them. Loyalty. A heart not just of a wolf, but of something more. One night, As Duke lay beside Ghost atop a ridge, watching the moon glow over the valley, he realized something. He was no longer a helpless stray. He was no longer alone. He was where he was meant to be. And as the night wind carried the howls of the pack across the mountains, Duke lifted his head and howled with them. For the first time in his life, he belonged. Duke's battle, a German shepherd's fight for survival. The frozen wilderness of Montana was as beautiful as it was unforgiving. Snow blanketed the dense pine forest, muffling all sound except for the bitter wind that howled through the trees. It was a land of survival, a place where the weak perished and the strong endured. And on this night, Duke, a lone German shepherd, was barely surviving. His once proud frame was reduced to skin and bone, his fur matted from weeks of battling the elements. He had been abandoned long ago, left to fend for himself in a world that had no mercy for the weak. His ribs ached from hunger, his paws numb from the snow. But it wasn't the cold that would kill him. It was the wolves. They'd been stalking him for miles, their amber eyes glowing in the darkness. Duke had known the moment he crossed into their hunting grounds that he was being watched. Now, they were closing in. The attack began. The first growl came from the shadows, a low, menacing rumble that sent a shiver down Duke's spine. He whipped around, ears flattened, eyes darting between the shapes emerging from the tree line. 5 wolves. They moved like phantoms, their breath curling into the freezing air like steam. The alpha, a towering gray beast with scars marking his face, stepped forward. His pack flanked him, forming a semicircle around Duke. Duke lowered his head, muscles tensed. Running was not an option. He had nowhere left to go. The first wolf lunged. Duke dodged, barely avoiding the snapping jaws that aimed for his throat. Another came at him from the side, slamming into him with bone-crushing force, knocking him into the snow. Pain flared through his ribs, but he scrambled back to his feet. A third wolf struck, teeth sinking into Duke's hind leg. A sharp yelp escaped him as he twisted, trying to shake the predator off. Blood stained the snow. This was it. They would tear him apart. But then something changed. A sound distant at first, then growing louder. A howl. But not from the pack. From another wolf. An unlikely savior. The pack hesitated. Their ears flicked toward the sound, their eyes narrowing. And then, from the darkness, another figure emerged. A lone wolf. But not just any wolf. He was massive, his fur silver in the moonlight, his eyes burning like embers. The alpha turned, snarling, teeth bared. But the silver wolf didn't back down. He stepped forward, head high, posture unwavering. A challenge. The pack's body language shifted. Uncertainty rippled through them. This was no ordinary wolf. The alpha growled, stepping toward the intruder. The silver wolf did not move. Then, in a flash, he lunged. The fight was brutal. Snow exploded beneath them as the two beasts clashed. Teeth snapped. Claws raked. Blood splattered onto the white ground. The silver wolf fought with precision and experience, countering the alpha's every move. And then, it was over. The alpha staggered back, panting, blood dripping from a wound on his shoulder. The silver wolf let out a deep, powerful growl, a final warning. The pack hesitated. Then, one by one, they turned and vanished into the trees. The silver wolf stood still, watching them disappear. And then, he turned to Duke. Brotherhood in the wild. Duke did not move. His body ached, his wounds stung, but he was still alive. The silver wolf took one step forward, then another. He stopped just inches from Duke and lowered his head, not in dominance, but in something else. Acceptance. Duke stared at him, confused. He had spent so long alone, but here, now, he wasn't. The silver wolf let out a short chuff, then turned, walking back toward the darkness of the trees. And without hesitation, Duke followed. A new life in the wild. Days passed. Duke learned. The silver wolf ghost, as Duke came to know him, was no ordinary wolf. He was a leader, a protector, a lone warrior who had somehow chosen Duke as his own. Ghost taught him how to hunt, how to listen to the forest, how to survive not as a stray, but as a wild creature. And Duke changed. His body grew stronger. His instincts sharpened. He no longer feared the night, he embraced it. But even as he adapted to the wild, he did not lose himself. Where Ghost led with silent precision, Duke followed with unwavering loyalty. One evening, as the snow fell gently around them, Duke lifted his head and looked toward the moonlit valley. Ghost stood beside him, quiet and watchful. And for the first time, Duke raised his head and howled. A howl that carried through the mountains. A howl of belonging. A howl of survival. Because now, he was not just a stray. He was one of them. And in the wild, family is not just by blood. It is forged by survival, by trust, and by the unbreakable bonds that transcend species. Duke was home. Duke's second chance, a German shepherd's battle for survival. The frozen wilderness of Montana was a place of beauty and brutality. It was a land where survival was a daily battle, where predators and prey moved in an endless cycle of life and death. And on this particular winter evening, a lone German shepherd named Duke stood at the center of it all, battered, starving, but still standing. Duke had once been a loyal companion to a man who no longer wanted him. Left to fend for himself, he had adapted, relying on his instincts to find food, shelter, and evade predators. But no amount of street smarts could prepare him for what was coming. The wolves had found him. The attack in the snow. The first warning came as a low, bone-chilling growl. Duke froze, his muscles tensing. His ears flicked back, his breath coming in rapid clouds. He turned slowly, his sharp eyes scanning the dense trees. Then they appeared. 6 wolves emerged from the shadows, their amber eyes fixed on him. They moved in coordinated steps, their bodies sleek and powerful. At the front was the alpha, a massive black wolf with a silver streak down his back. Duke was outnumbered. The pack spread out, cutting off his escape. The alpha stepped forward, his ears flattened, his lips curling to reveal sharp teeth. Duke knew the rules of the wild. If he ran, he was dead. So he did the only thing he could. He stood his ground. The first wolf lunged. Duke dodged, barely avoiding the snapping jaws. He twisted, using his shoulder to shove another wolf aside, but the sheer force of their attack sent him skidding across the icy ground. A sharp pain tore through his flank as one of the wolves sank its teeth into him. Duke yelped, kicking out with his powerful legs, knocking his attacker back. Blood stained the snow beneath him. Another wolf leapt onto his back, and this time Duke couldn't shake him off. This was it. But just as the pack closed in for the kill, a new sound split the air. A gunshot. Then a shout. The wolves hesitated, and in that moment, everything changed. A new protector. The wolves backed away as a figure pushed through the snow, a man wearing heavy winter gear, holding a rifle. Jim Harrison, a wildlife biologist, had been monitoring wolf activity in the area when he stumbled upon the attack. He fired a warning shot into the air, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. He saw the injured dog, struggling to stand, bleeding into the snow. He saw the wolves, calculating whether the fight was still worth it. "Easy now," Jim murmured. The alpha growled, eyes locked onto the man, but after a long, tense moment, he turned and vanished into the trees. One by one, the rest of the pack followed. Jim let out a slow breath. Then he turned to Duke. The dog stood on shaking legs, his coat matted with blood, his body trembling from exhaustion. "Hey, buddy," Jim said softly, kneeling. "You're one tough guy, aren't you?" Duke stared at him, unsure whether to trust him. He had been abandoned before. Why should he trust a human again? But as Jim slowly extended his hand, offering a piece of jerky from his pocket, Duke hesitated, then took it. And for the first time in months, he let himself hope. The road to recovery. Jim carefully lifted Duke into the back of his truck, driving straight to the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where his daughter, Sarah, was waiting. When she saw Duke, her breath caught in her throat. "Dad, where did you find him?" Out in Flathead, Jim replied, gently laying Duke on the examination table. He fought off a wolf pack. Sarah ran her hands over Duke's body, checking for broken bones and deep wounds. He's lost a lot of blood, but he's a fighter. Duke flinched at her touch, but he didn't growl. Sarah glanced at her father. Does he have a name? Jim smiled. He looks like a Duke to me. And that was how Duke's second chance began. For weeks, Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to nurse Duke back to health. His wounds healed. His strength returned. And slowly, so did his trust. Jim visited him every day, sitting by his kennel, talking to him in that calm, reassuring voice. And Duke began to believe. A decision to make. Months later, the Montana wilderness had thawed into spring. The day had come when Duke would have to make a choice: return to the wild or find a new home. Jim and Sarah loaded him into the truck and drove out to a wide, open stretch of land on the outskirts of town. The moment Duke's paws touched the ground, he froze. He looked around the endless fields, the trees in the distance, the scent of freedom. Then he turned back to Jim and sat at his feet. Jim chuckled, scratching behind Duke's ears. Guess that answers that. Duke wagged his tail. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. And this time, he never would be again. Duke's fight for survival, a second chance in the wild. The frozen wilderness of Montana was an unforgiving place, where winter's chill could be just as deadly as a lurking predator. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow, casting long shadows beneath the silver moonlight. For Duke, a battered German shepherd, the cold wasn't the most immediate threat. He wasn't alone. A low, eerie growl rumbled through the still night. Wolves? Duke's ears flattened, his fur bristling as he turned. His body ached from old wounds, scars of past battles fought on his own. He had been abandoned long ago, left to fend for himself in a world where a domesticated dog didn't stand much of a chance. And now, the wolves had found him. The attack in the snow. They emerged from the trees like ghosts, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. A pack of 5, led by a massive alpha with thick black fur and a scar over his left eye. Duke knew the odds. 1 against 5, no escape, no backup. His heart pounded, but he didn't run. Running meant death. The alpha lunged first, teeth flashing. Duke dodged, but not fast enough. Jaws clamped down on his shoulder, tearing into his flesh. He yelped, but didn't go down. He spun, snapping his own teeth, catching the wolf's leg in retaliation. The second wolf struck from behind, slamming Duke into the snow. Pain flared through his ribs as he struggled to rise. He lashed out wildly, biting, kicking, fighting, but he was weakening. The wolves were relentless, circling him, closing in for the kill. Duke refused to surrender. But even as he struggled, his vision blurred. His limbs grew heavy, exhaustion sinking deep into his bones. This was it. Then a gunshot shattered the night. The wolves froze. Another shot followed, this time fired into the air. The alpha growled, but took a cautious step back. Then came a voice. "Easy, boy, I got you." A new protector. Jim Harrison, a wildlife biologist, lowered his rifle as he stepped into the clearing. He'd been out tracking wolves when he heard the sounds of the fight. He hadn't expected to find a German shepherd in the middle of it. Duke lay panting, blood staining his fur. He watched Jim warily, his golden brown eyes flickering between survival instinct and desperation. Jim knelt a few feet away, speaking in a calm, reassuring tone. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Duke didn't move. Jim slowly reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of jerky, holding it out. Duke hesitated, but hunger and exhaustion won. He snatched the jerky, gulping it down. Jim smiled. "Good boy." The wolves lingered at the edge of the trees, watching, assessing, but they had lost their advantage. With another whistle from the alpha, they disappeared into the night. Jim exhaled. Then, carefully, he lifted Duke into his arms. "You're coming with me. The road to recovery." The Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had seen plenty of animals in need, but Duke's case was different. Sarah, Jim's daughter and the center's veterinarian, met them at the entrance. Her eyes widened when she saw Duke's condition. "Dad, what happened?" "Wolf attack," Jim said grimly. "But he fought like hell." Sarah knelt beside Duke, her touch gentle as she examined his wounds. "He's lost a lot of blood, but he's strong." Duke flinched at her touch, but didn't growl. Jim watched, something deep in his chest tightening. He had seen plenty of animals give up after suffering this much. But Duke wasn't giving up. A second chance. Over the next few months, Duke transformed. His wounds healed. His strength returned. And slowly, so did his trust in people. Jim visited him every day, bringing treats, sitting beside his kennel, talking to him about the wilderness. And Duke listened. But even as he recovered, a question loomed. Would he stay, or would he go back to the wild? Jim knew Duke wasn't like any other dog. He'd survived alone for so long, maybe that was where he belonged. But Duke would have to decide for himself. The final choice. One crisp spring morning, Jim and Sarah took Duke back to the wilderness. His old home. They drove out to a sprawling valley where the trees met open fields, where Duke could run free. Jim opened the truck door. Duke stepped out slowly. He looked at the trees, at the open sky. Then he turned back and sat at Jim's feet. Sarah let out a breathless laugh. "Well, I guess that settles it." Jim smiled, kneeling down, running a hand through Duke's thick fur. "You're home, boy." Duke wagged his tail. For the first time in years, he belonged. And this time, he would never be alone again. Duke's fight for survival, a second chance in the wild. The frozen wilderness of Montana was an unforgiving place, where winter's grip turned the land into a white abyss of danger and beauty. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling the sounds of life that struggled beneath it. Here, in the vast, untamed wild, survival was reserved for the strong and the cunning. And Duke was neither. Not anymore. The battered German shepherd limped through the deep snow. Hunger clawed at his stomach, and exhaustion dulled his senses. Once a proud working dog, he had been abandoned, left to fend for himself in a world where domestic instincts meant little. But the cold wasn't the worst of it. A low growl echoed through the still air, making the hair along Duke's spine rise. He froze, his ears flicking toward the sound. Wolves. They'd been following him for days, watching, waiting for his strength to give out. Now, they were done waiting. The attack in the snow. The first wolf emerged from the shadows, a massive alpha with silver-gray fur and eyes that gleamed with hunger. 3 others flanked him, their movements slow and deliberate, forming a deadly semicircle around Duke. There was no escape. Duke's instincts screamed at him to run, but he knew better. Running would only make him prey. The alpha lunged first, its teeth flashing like knives. Duke dodged, but pain exploded in his side as another wolf struck from behind, knocking him onto the frozen ground. Snow erupted around them. Duke snapped his jaws, teeth meeting empty air as the wolves pressed their attack. His body screamed in protest, but he fought back with everything he had left. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. A third wolf charged, jaws wide. Bang! A gunshot split the night. The wolves froze, ears flattening as the deafening sound echoed through the trees. Another shot fired into the air sent them retreating into the shadows. Then came a voice. "Easy now, boy. I got you." A new protector. Jim Harrison, a wildlife biologist, lowered his rifle as he stepped into the clearing. His sharp eyes assessed the situation quickly. A German shepherd, half-starved and bleeding, surrounded by wolves. The dog stared at him, his body shaking from adrenaline and cold. Jim knelt, holding out a hand. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Duke didn't move. Jim reached into his coat, pulling out a small piece of jerky. The scent hit Duke's nose, and hunger won over fear. He took it. Jim smiled. "That's a good boy." With careful hands, he checked Duke's injuries. Bad, but not fatal. "You're coming with me," Jim murmured. For the first time in months, Duke wasn't alone. The road to recovery. The Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was meant for wild animals, but Duke was different. Sarah, Jim's daughter and the center's lead veterinarian, took one look at Duke and knew this was going to be a challenge. "He's got fight left in him," Jim said, watching as Duke lay on the examination table, his golden brown eyes flicking warily between them. Sarah ran her hands gently over his ribs. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, and those wounds are deep. But he's a survivor." Duke flinched but didn't growl. Jim stayed close, talking to Duke every day, gaining his trust. At first, the dog remained distant, but as weeks passed, he began to change. His wounds healed, his muscles strengthened, and his spirit, which had nearly been broken, rekindled. A choice to make. Months later, Duke had transformed. The scars remained, but his body was strong again. His eyes were bright with life. Yet Jim knew the inevitable question was coming. "Dad," Sarah said one morning, watching Duke follow Jim through the center, "he's not just any dog. He survived out there for so long. Maybe he belongs in the wild." Jim sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Maybe." So, they gave Duke the choice. The final test. One crisp autumn morning, Jim and Sarah took Duke back to the wilderness. They drove deep into the valley, where the air smelled of pine and frost, where the mountains met the sky in a vast, endless horizon. Jim opened the truck door. Duke stepped out. For a moment, he just stood there, ears pricked, scanning the landscape. Sarah held her breath. Was this it? Then, Duke turned back and sat at Jim's feet. A soft chuckle rumbled in Jim's chest. "Guess that answers that." Sarah wiped a tear away, laughing. "Yeah, he's made his choice." Jim knelt, running a hand through Duke's fur. "Welcome home, boy." Duke's tail wagged. He had survived. He had fought. And now, he had found his place. A story of survival, strength, and second chances in life. Duke's journey from abandonment to survival is more than just a tale of a dog overcoming impossible odds. It is a reflection of the challenges we all face in life. His story resonates deeply with anyone who has ever felt lost, betrayed, or left to fend for themselves. Life, much like the frozen wilderness of Montana, is harsh, unpredictable, and at times unforgiving. There are moments when we feel like Duke, exhausted, beaten down, and surrounded by challenges that seem too big to overcome. Whether it's losing a job, facing a major health crisis, struggling with loneliness, or dealing with the loss of a loved one, we all encounter wolves in different forms. These are the moments when we feel like there is no escape, no way out, and that life has stacked the odds against us. But just as Duke fought against the wolves, we too must find the strength within us to keep going, even when everything seems hopeless. One of the most powerful lessons from Duke's story is that help often comes from unexpected places. Just when Duke was at his weakest, a stranger Jim appeared. In our lives too, we sometimes find support where we least expect it. A kind word from a friend, an opportunity that comes out of nowhere, or even the guidance of a mentor can completely change the course of our journey. It reminds us that no matter how alone we feel, there are always people willing to help. We just have to be open to accepting that help. Jim didn't force Duke to trust him, but he offered kindness and patience, something we all need to extend to those who are struggling around us. Sometimes, being that helping hand to someone else can be just as transformative as receiving it. Another key takeaway from Duke's experience is the power of resilience. Despite his suffering, he never gave up. He could have collapsed in the snow, surrendered to the wolves, or remained fearful and broken even after his rescue. But instead, he fought to recover, to trust again, and to find a new purpose. In life, setbacks are inevitable, but they do not define us. How we respond to them does. Whether it's overcoming personal failures, rebuilding after a financial crisis, or healing from emotional pain, we must push forward, just as Duke did. Pain is temporary, but strength is built in the process of enduring it. Finally, Duke's decision to stay with Jim rather than return to the wild is a beautiful metaphor for the choices we make in life. Sometimes we cling to old habits, toxic relationships, or past failures because we think we have no other options. But like Duke, we always have a choice to move forward, to embrace the people who truly care for us, and to build a future that isn't defined by past hardships. His story teaches us that we are not our struggles, we are our ability to rise above them. No matter what you are facing today, keep fighting, keep believing, and trust that your second chance is coming. If this story touches your heart, take a moment to reflect on the power of resilience and love. Together, we can celebrate the bonds that make life extraordinary. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories.